Come closer, dear listener. The night stretches wide and slow, and Persia remembers. Lie back if you wish. Let the air settle softly around you. Somewhere beyond this small moment, beneath the velvet sweep of stars, there's a world still humming with stories. Stories older than stone, carried across dunes and gardens by voices that refuse to fade. Imagine the air, cool, scented faintly with rosewater and dust. In the distance, a shepherd's flute lingers like a sigh. The moon rests upon the roofs of clay houses, turning their edges silver. The world is hushed, yet awake, the kind of quiet that asks you to listen, not with your ears, but with your heart. This is Persia, ancient, vast, and alive, not the Persia of maps or empires, but the one of breath and memory, of hands grinding wheat and eyes watching constellations pass. The desert and the garden share the same sky here, and under people have always gathered to tell their stories. Once, before books were bound and shelves were built, stories lived in the warmth of human voices. Old women whispered them to children wrapped in woven blankets. Men told them to one another at roadside fires. Some said stories were a kind of prayer, words sent upward to remind the heavens that mortals were still awake, still wondering. Tonight, I am that voice for you, and you listening are the next keeper of the tale. The wind moves slowly through the cypress trees, and their long shadows sway across marble courtyards. You can almost hear the water trickling from carved fountains, its rhythm steady as a heartbeat. The scent of jasmine drifts in the air. Above, constellations trace patterns once used to guide travelers through the endless desert. Orion, the hunter, Ursa, the bear, and somewhere beyond them, the seven sisters shining pale and soft. If you were here, you might lie on a rooftop, wrapped in a woolen shawl, your cheek pressed against the cool clay. You watch the stars and wonder who else. Centuries ago, Maya looked at the same light and whispered the same name, Sohrab or Rostam, or perhaps one of your own. Persia was a land contrasts. There were golden palaces where kings debated the stars, and villages where children chased goats through fields of barley. There were merchants who crossed mountains to trade silk and honey, and poets who traded verses for bread. Yet, wherever they went, they carried the same belief, that a story could hold truth more gently than a sword or a crown ever could. It is said that every story here begins with an invocation, a moment to honor the soul of the tale. So before we walk further, take a slow breath with me. Feel it, the stillness, the weight of time settling lightly over your shoulders. There was once a storyteller named Dastan Khan. He wandered from town to town with nothing but a small lute and a memory that could hold 1,000 lives. When asked how he remembered them all, he would smile and say, "Because I never forget the feeling of each." That was the secret. Stories were not meant to be remembered word for word, but feeling by feeling. And perhaps that is why this one has lasted so long. You see, the story of Rostam and Sohrab is not only about war or heroes or kingdoms. It is about hearts that did not know they were the same. It is about the ache of recognition that comes too late, and the quiet courage of love unspoken. But we will not hurry there yet. No good story begins in haste. Instead, let us linger a little longer in the night before their names were known. Picture the city of Balkh, its streets drowsy with lantern light. Merchants close their stalls, the smell of saffron and baked bread hanging in the air. In a distant courtyard, a mother hums to her child. A scholar rolls up his parchment and sighs. A soldier sharpens his blade by the fire, unaware that destiny, even now, sharpens him too. Somewhere far beyond them, the Oxus River glides through moonlight like a silver ribbon, dividing lands that share the same blood. The water whispers secrets to the reeds. That love will cross it and grief will follow. Do you hear it too? The river's murmur sounds almost like a lullaby. Sometimes, I think the earth itself remembers the footsteps of those who came before us. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear the echo of hooves, the gallop of Raksh, Rostam's faithful horse. You can almost feel the pulse of drums from ancient festivals, the laughter of children chasing each other through the bazaar, the rustle of silk as dancers turned beneath the torches. This was a world where gods and mortals often brushed against one another without realizing it. Every mountain seemed to have a guardian. Every flame carried a spirit. People lit fires not just for warmth, but for reverence, believing that within the flame lived truth itself. And perhaps it did. The glow of the fire, the hush of the night, these were the first storytellers. When the wind rises, listen closely. It carries not just sand, but words. Words of courage, of tenderness, of regret. They move between the dunes, slip through the pomegranate trees, and reach even you here, so far away in time. Before we speak the names of heroes, I want you to know something simple. They were once as human as we are. They loved and feared. They hoped and wept. Their greatness was not in their size, but in their hearts that could hold both strength and sorrow. When I was a child, my grandmother used to tell me, to understand a hero, you must understand his mother. I didn't know what she meant then, but later, when I learned of Tomine and her son Sohrab, I began to see, behind every legend stands a quiet, ordinary love that endures even when the world forgets. And maybe that's why this tale never faded, because it is not only Persia's story, it is ours too, a reminder that even across centuries, the same longings live within us, to be seen, to belong, to be forgiven. Now, as the night deepens, the sky grows wider. The stars tilt, and the horizon hums softly like a drum in the distance. The world feels suspended, between waking and sleep, between memory and dream. Before you drift further, tell me, have you ever wondered how love and destiny can live in the same heart? Because that is where our story begins. The morning in Persia does not rush. It unfurls slowly, like silk being smoothed by careful hands. Before the first call of the roosters, before the market bell rings, the land already hums with life. You can smell it, the saffron blooming faintly in the kitchen air, the smoke from small fires curling into the sky. The world here wakes with quiet purpose. Every sound, every movement carries the weight of centuries, as if time itself has learned to walk gently so as not to disturb the dust of memory. If you listen closely, you can hear the hands of the potter shaping the day. Clay, cool and heavy, rests against his palms. He turns on the wheel with steady rhythm, pressing stories into its surface, each bowl and jar an echo of the same patient devotion. Outside, the women of the village sweep their courtyards, scattering rosewater to cool the ground. Their sleeves brush the air, carrying the scent of cardamom and sun-dried linen. Children chase each other past mud walls painted with patterns of birds and vines. The shepherd begin their slow departure toward the foothills, their flutes calling the sheep like soft prayers. And far beyond, the mountains watch it all in silence, the same mountains that have watched for thousands of years. This is a rhythm of ordinary Persia, the part of history that rarely finds its way into chronicles or royal decrees. It belongs not to kings or heroes, but to those whose lives built the very soil beneath them. Their days may seem simple, yet each gesture is a verse in the long poem of survival. When I think of the empire, I do not see marble halls or jewel crowns first. I see hands, brown, calloused, strong, hands grinding wheat, hands dyeing wool in copper basins, hands tracing prayers into ash before the morning light. These were the true architects of the empire's endurance. Long before Rostam's name filled the air, this land had learned how to balance strength with tenderness. Even the soil seemed to know the art of giving and taking, of enduring drought and rejoicing in rain. The people followed the same wisdom. They honored fire as sacred, believing it to be the breath of truth. They spoke to water as to a friend, leaving coins or petals as offerings to rivers that had seen everything. In Zoroastrian temples, flames burned endlessly, tended by quiet priests and sometimes by women chosen for their devotion. The faith taught that good thoughts, good words, and good deeds were not lofty ideals but daily labors, woven into bread-making, storytelling, even laughter. The people did not separate the divine from the mundane. Every act was a chance to keep the world in balance. Perhaps you would have liked it here. The air carried a kind of calm wisdom, and though life was hard, it was never empty. Even in small villages, there was music. There was always music. The frame drum echoed from courtyards, its pulse rising with the rhythm of work. Singers wandered from town to town, their songs layered with longing and pride. And when the day cooled, families gathered under grape arbors or pomegranate trees to share stories and bread. If you walked through a bazaar, You would feel the pulse of the world passing through it. Merchants from Babylon, India, even Greece traded cloth and spices, each speaking in a language of gestures and smiles. Carpets glowed with the red of madder root, the blue of lapis, and the yellow of saffron threads. Lanterns swung gently overhead. Somewhere, a storyteller stood on a crate, reciting tales of old kings and forgotten lovers. Children pressed close, eyes wide. Some would remember every word for the rest of their lives. Women, too, were keepers of stories. They carried them in songs sung while grinding grain, in lullabies whispered to children who did not yet know the meaning of fate. In many homes, a mother's story was the first history a child would ever hear. And so, memory passed not just through the ink of scholars, but through the breath of ordinary life. The empire's reach was vast. From the shores of the Persian Gulf to the mountains of Bactria, it stretched like an ocean of languages and faces. But beneath the crowns and banners, the people shared a single heartbeat, a reverence for harmony. Even the kings, for all their grandeur, were expected to rule with Asha, the cosmic order that governed both stars and souls. It was said that a just ruler kept fire pure and water clean. At dusk, when the heat softened and the shadows lengthened, people often climbed to the rooftops. From there, they could see the fields fading into the horizon, the colors of the day dissolving into indigo. It was a time to rest, to listen, to remember that life was both fleeting and eternal. Children would point at the stars, asking their mothers which one watched over their family. The mothers, smiling, would invent names, because sometimes the truth mattered less than comfort. And in the stillness of night, you could feel history breathing. The same winds that once carried Darius's armies across the plains now brushed gently against olive trees. The same rivers that reflected the glory of Persepolis now mirrored the quiet lights of humble homes. Greatness, after all, is only the shadow of the ordinary multiplied by time. Do you ever think about that? The way a civilization is built not just on battles, but on breakfast, on stories told to a child, on the way someone closes a door softly at dusk? Persia understood that. Its beauty was not only in its power, but in its patience. As I walk you through its fields, imagine the texture beneath your feet. Soft dust, cool stones, stalks of wheat brushing your ankles. You pass women drawing water from wells, their bangles chiming like distant bells. A farmer waves, his face carved by sun and smile lines. A child hands you a fig, sweet and warm from the day. For a moment, you belong here, not as a visitor, but as one of them. The scent of saffron lingers on your fingertips. Somewhere nearby, a temple bell rings softly, calling the faithful to evening prayer. Flames dance in bronze basins, their light trembling against white walls. In that glow, you can almost believe that time itself bends, that for one heartbeat, you stand within eternity. Persia was not perfect. It carried its sorrows, its injustices, its forgotten voices. But even in its flaws, it sought balance. And perhaps it is why its stories endure. They remind us that beauty and pain have always shared the same breath. The night deepens again. The orchards sigh beneath the wind. From the distance, a voice rises. Someone singing an old ballad about a warrior, a lion among men. The melody drifts through the trees, and suddenly, all the quiet stories of potters and mothers and shepherds begin to weave together, forming one vast tapestry of memory. As dawn touches the orchards, the people whisper another name, Rostam, the mighty one. Would you have followed him into battle, or stayed home to guard the stories? They say that when Rostam was born, the sky itself seemed to pause. The stars hung lower, as if to see the child who would one day carry the weight of Persia on his shoulders. His mother's cries echoed across the plain, and when at last the child came forth, his first breath was not a wail, but a roar, so the storytellers say. Some call it legend, others truth. In Persia, the two are never far apart. Rostam was no ordinary child. He was the son of Zal, the white-haired prince who had been raised by the great Simurgh, that mythical bird of wisdom and fire. And from the moment Rostam opened his eyes, there was a brightness in them, a kind of knowing, as though he remembered lives that had come before. His arms were strong, his voice clear, and his heart restless. Even as a boy, he would wander far beyond the safety of his father's court, chasing the sound of the wind through the reeds. I sometimes imagine him there, standing by the river with the sunlight caught in his hair, his feet sinking into the mud, watching the reflection of his own face shimmer and break. What must it feel like to sense that your life is already larger than yourself? To know that the world expects you to be unbreakable? Rostam's childhood was filled with the stories of heroes before him, of Arash the archer, of Jamshid the wise, of Cyrus who ruled justly. But even as he listened, he would frown and say, "Their battles ended. Mine have not yet begun." His father would smile sadly, knowing that the boy's words carried both promise and prophecy. When he was still young, Rostam encountered the creature who would become his truest companion, Raksh, the horse born of both flame and storm. No one could tame the creature. Stablemen feared his hooves. Soldiers whispered that he belonged to the gods. But Rostam, patient and unafraid, approached him with calm eyes and an open hand. The tale goes that Raksh tested him, snorting, striking, circling, but Rostam stood still, neither commanding nor pleading. At last the horse lowered his head and pressed his forehead against Rostam's chest. From that moment, they were bound, not as master and beast, but as brothers, and when they rode together, their shadows stretched long across the desert like one soul given two bodies. In those days, Persia was a vast kingdom bordered by envy. Enemies watched its borders, hungry for its wealth and wisdom. Rostam's strength soon became its shield. By the time he was 20, his name was already spoken with awe. When he fought, his spear flashed like lightning. When he shouted, mountains seemed to answer. And when he laughed, rarely, the air itself felt lighter. But fame, like sunlight, burns as it blesses. Wherever Rostam went, expectation followed. Children sang his name in play. Kings invoked it in fear. Yet in the quiet hours between battles, when the campfires dimmed and the men slept, he would sit alone, sharpening his blade by moonlight, his thoughts wandering to the life he would never know. I wonder, what does it mean to be a man who must always be mighty? To never lay down the armor, even when your heart longs to rest. Rostam fought not for gold nor glory, but for a sense of duty that had been carved into him since birth. The Zoroastrian priests often spoke of Asha, the order of truth, the balance between light and dark. And Rostam believed his strength existed to preserve that balance. He was the living edge between chaos and peace. Yet each victory carried a strange silence. The cheers would fade, the songs would end, and only the memory of battle would remain. Once, after defeating a rebel prince near the Oxus River, Rostam dismounted and walked among the fallen. He lifted his helmet and gazed at the sky, its endless blue mirrored in the water below. "They say I am blessed," he murmured, "but what blessing asks for so much blood?" No one heard him but Raksh, who stood quietly nearby, his great body flecked with dust and sunlight. Even the mightiest hearts crave gentleness. Rostam found it not in courts or celebrations, but in the rare moments when he returned home. His father Zal, aged and wise, would greet him with soft eyes, and his mother Retold would embrace him fiercely, as if she could still protect him from the world. In those embraces, the hero became a son again, a boy whose hands smelled of horsehair and steel, but whose soul still sought comfort. At feasts, he sat apart from the flatterers. He preferred the company of bards and priests, asking them for old tales, as though he were trying to measure his own fate against the stories of others. Some said he laughed only when the tales ended well. Others said he laughed so he would not weep. And yet, for all his solitude, there was a light in Rostam that drew others near. Soldiers trusted him, not because he promised victory, but because he made them feel seen. He walked among them before every battle, placing a hand on each shoulder, reminding them that they fought not for kings but for one another. That perhaps was his greatest gift, not the swing of his sword, but the weight of his compassion. Still, compassion has its cost. For the more he cared, the more he carried. When a soldier died, he would remember his name. When a city burned, he would smell the smoke for months afterward. His strength became his silence. His silence became his grief. Persian poets later wrote that Rostam's heart was like an iron shield lined with silk, tough enough to bear the blows of war, soft enough to bleed for strangers. And maybe that is the reason his legend endures. He was not a god, nor flawless. He was a man who bore greatness like a wound he could never heal. In time, even kings began to fear his independence. Rostam belonged to no throne. He served the idea of Iran, not the men who ruled it. When courtiers whispered against him, he shrugged it off. "Let them speak," he said. "I serve what endures." But their envy lingered like dust in the corners of palaces, waiting for a moment to turn against him. When he returned from his seventh labor, a journey through monsters, demons, and despair, he stood atop the mountain and looked down at the plains below. The wind whipped his cloak around him, and for the first time, he felt the loneliness of height. It is a strange thing, isn't it? To climb so far that there is no one left beside you. Some nights, I imagine him lying awake beside rocks, staring at the stars. He must have wondered whether the gods envied or pitied him. Power can protect a man from his enemies, but never from himself. Perhaps you can picture it. The great warrior, wrapped in his cloak, the desert cold against his skin, his hand resting on the mane of his faithful horse. Around him, the world sleeps. The embers of the fire glow like small, patient hearts. Somewhere beyond, a night bird calls. He closes his eyes and exhales, not as a hero, but as a man trying to forget his own name for a while. Even heroes must sleep, and in sleep, destiny often whispers. Tell me, listener, do you think a warrior dreams of peace? In the kingdom of Samangan, night came softly, like silk drawn over a flame. The air smelled of wet stone and myrrh. Beyond the palace walls, the desert sighed, and the moon, round and pale as milk, hung above the towers like a lantern the heavens had forgotten to extinguish. Within those walls walked a woman whose name the poets would never let die. Tamine, daughter of kings, and one of the few whose courage was quiet enough to be mistaken for calm. She had grown beneath the shadow of power, trained in the art of silence. Yet her eyes carried the same restlessness that stirred the horses beyond the stables, the same longing that kept owls awake when all else slept. In her youth, she had been taught that women must wait for life to come to them. But Tamine had learned early that life does not knock. It whispers, and you must have the courage to listen. That night, she could not sleep. The palace corridors were heavy with torchlight, their flames bending and snapping in the draft. Servants whispered of a stranger who had arrived, a warrior clad in lion skin, resting with his horse in the royal courtyard. They said he had come from distant Zabulistan, his presence both a blessing and an omen. Tamine felt her heart quicken at the sound of his name, Rostam. She had heard of him all her life, as others might hear of a constellation. Brilliant, unreachable, always above. Children recited his victories as lullabies. Bards compared him to the strength of mountains and the swiftness of storms. But for Tamine, his legend was more than myth. It was a reminder that somewhere beyond her golden cage, there lived men whose lives were their own. When she reached the balcony, the night opened before her like a story half told. Below, she saw him, tall even in repose, a figure of quiet enormity. His armor lay beside him, his sword gleaming faintly in the moonlight. He was asleep, his great horse rocks curled beside him, their breaths rising in rhythm. In that stillness, he did not look like a warrior. He looked like a man who had carried too much for too long. Something within her stirred, not curiosity, not desire, but recognition. It was as though two winds, long apart, had met again. She turned away, yet her feet carried her downward through corridors and courtyards until the marble gave way to sand. Her steps were soundless. Rostam awoke before she reached him. A warrior's instincts never sleep. But when he opened his eyes and saw her standing there, barefoot, veiled in white, he did not reach for his sword. Instead, he rose slowly, as if afraid that a sudden movement might break the spell of that night. "Princess of Samangan," he said softly, his voice like the low murmur of a river at dusk. "The hour is late." "Only for those who fear the dark," she answered. And though her tone was calm, her heart raced. They spoke quietly, their words circling one another like cautious birds. She told him she had dreamed of him before she ever knew he lived, that in her dream he rode through fire and shadow to bring peace to two divided lands. Rostam listened, moved by her certainty. There was nothing of flattery in her voice, only truth spoken with trembling courage. In her presence, He felt something rare, ease. She did not see him as a symbol or a savior, but as a man who carried both strength and sorrow. He, who had faced demons and kings, found himself disarmed by her gentleness. And as the night deepened, words gave way to silence, the kind of silence that hums between souls who understand without needing to explain. They spoke of Persia, of faith, of duty. She told him of her people's longing for peace. He told her the way to protecting it. He confessed, almost shyly, that he sometimes dreamed of laying down his sword and living as an ordinary man. She smiled. Perhaps the world needs both kinds of men, she said, the ones who fight and the ones who dream. It was then that the wind changed, softening the air. The moon slid behind a cloud, and the stars shone brighter, as if watching. Rostam took her hand, hesitantly, reverently. In that touch, there was no conquest, only recognition. The bond that formed between them was not forged in the heat of passion, but in the stillness of understanding. Later, when dawn began to paint the sky with pale gold, Tamine sat alone by her window. She watched the first light touch the distant hills, and she felt the shape of something new within her. Not merely love, but certainty as deep as earth. She knew, even then, that this night would not pass quietly into memory. Rostam left at sunrise, as all warriors must. But before he mounted Raksh, he gave her a talisman, a small band of onyx engraved with his name. If a son is born, he said, place this upon his arm, and let him seek me when he is grown. For though the world is vast, truth will guide him home. Tamine watched him disappear beyond the gates, her fingers tight around the token. The world seemed both larger and lonelier at once. The scent of horses lingered in the air, mingled with the sweetness of dawn. She closed her eyes and whispered his name once, not as a plea, but as a promise. Months passed. The seasons shifted. In the gardens of Samangan, where fountains murmured and apricot trees bent under their fruit, Tamine felt life stir within her. It was not merely a child she carried. It was the pulse of destiny itself. The priest spoke of omens, of dreams filled with fire and lions, but she only smiled. She had seen his eyes in her sleep, clear and bright as the morning sky. When her time came, thunder rolled across the mountains, though the sky was clear. The palace filled with light, and from her chamber came the first cry of a child, strong, fierce, full of life. The nurses gasped. He will be mighty, they whispered. And Tamine, though weak from pain, only nodded. She knew it already. She named him Sohrab. To her, the name meant dawn's first breath, the moment when night surrenders to day. She pressed the onyx band onto his tiny arm. As Rostam had said, and in that act, the circle of fate closed quietly around them. As she held her son, she thought of his father riding somewhere beyond the horizon, unaware of the life he had left behind. She wondered if he would feel it. A sudden warmth, a pause in his breath, a whisper in the wind calling his name. From the quiet heart of love, destiny was born crying into the night. Would you tell your child who their father was, if fate warned you to stay silent? They said the boy was born with a lion's cry. From the very first breath, Sohrab's voice filled the palace halls like the echo of something remembered from another age. The midwives trembled when they placed him in Tamine's arms, for his gaze, clear and fierce, seemed too old for a newborn. But when his mother whispered his name, the storm in his eyes softened, and he fell silent, as though listening to a lullaby only he could hear. He grew fast, as the children of destiny often do. By his 5th year, his feet were quick as gazelles, his laughter bright as the sun on water. He learned to ride before he could fully reach the stirrups, and the horses seemed to understand him. When others tugged at reins and shouted commands, Sohrab simply leaned forward, whispering to them as his mother once whispered to him. The beasts followed as if led by a promise. In the palace of Samangan, his days were a weave of lessons and games. Yet even in play, a strange gravity followed him. He would listen when the elders told tales of ancient Persia, of kings and monsters, of battles fought under the gaze of the gods. He would rest his chin in his hand and ask, who was the greatest among them? And always the answer came, Rostam. At first, the name meant little to him, only another figure carved into legend stone. But as the stories deepened, as he heard how Rostam tamed Raksh, how he faced a white demon and returned with eyes unblinking. Something inside Sohrab began to stir. He would rise after the tales were done and walk out into the garden, staring toward the mountains as if the sound of that name still echoed somewhere beyond them. "Tell me more," he would say to his mother. Was Rostam truly so strong? Tamine would nod, her eyes distant. Stronger than men, but not stronger than fate. And what of his heart? The boy would press. Was it kind? She would smile faintly. He was both storm and shelter. You'll understand one day. But she never spoke the truth that trembled behind her words. She never told him that the man of his dreams was the father whose name he bore in secret. Each time he asked more, she would turn the question aside like water flowing around stone. When you are older, she'd say, you will see what strength and sorrow truly mean. Still, a mother's silence cannot erase a father's shadow. Sohrab felt in the rhythm of his blood, in the hunger that no feast could satisfy. Sometimes, in the quiet of dawn, he would take the onyx band from his arm and hold it against the light. Tracing the worn inscription, Rostam, it read. He would whisper the name softly, as though it might answer. As the years unfolded, so too did his strength. By 12, he could bend the training bows of grown men. By 16, no one in Samangan could best him in combat. Yet he never fought to humiliate. There was gentleness in his power, a restraint born from some unspoken understanding. The villagers loved him not for his might, but for his kindness. He shared food with shepherds, helped rebuild walls after storms, and laughed easily with children who chased him through the orchards. Still, when night came, his laughter quieted. He would lie beneath the stars, listening to the desert wind, and wonder if somewhere under the same sky, a man with eyes like his own was awake too. Sometimes he dreamed of him. In those dreams, Rostam was not the hero of poems, but a figure blurred by distance. They met always by a river. Sohrab would call out, and the man would turn, smiling, but before he could speak, the dream dissolved into dawn. Each morning, Sohrab awoke with that smile still burning in his mind, and a longing so deep it left his chest hollow. His mother saw it too, the way he lingered at the horizon, the way his questions grew heavier with each passing season. She would touch his hair and say, "The world beyond these walls is vast and cruel. Don't be in such a hurry to find it." But he would only answer, "I'm not seeking the world, mother. I'm seeking myself." When he turned 18, a messenger arrived from the north, a rugged soldier bearing news of unrest along the borderlands between Iran and Tehran. The air in Samangan thickened with rumors that armies gathered, that the old hatred between nations stirred once more. Sohrab listened in silence. His heart pounded not with fear, but with a strange, bright certainty. It was as if the name Rostam had suddenly come alive again, whispering through the corridors of his fate. That night, he went to his mother's chamber. She was seated by the window, embroidering a tapestry of lions and suns. "Mother," he said softly, "who is my father?" The needle froze in her hand. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "Why ask what cannot bring peace?" "Because silence no longer does," he replied. She turned to him, and in her eyes, he saw both love and fear. "You carry his fire," she said at last. "But some fires burn too fiercely to be named." Sohrab fell to his knees. "Tell me only this, does he live?" She hesitated. The truth hovered between them, fragile as a moth. Finally, she reached for his arm and placed her fingers upon the onyx band. "He lives," she said quietly. "And when you are ready, this will guide you." He looked down at the token, the name gleaming faintly in the lamplight. His pulse quickened. In that instant, all the unanswered questions of his life aligned into a single purpose. "Then I will find him," he said, "not for glory, not for vengeance, but because a son should know the man whose blood he bears." Tamine closed her eyes. "And if he does not know you, then I will remind him," Sohrab said gently, with honor, not anger. After that night, there was no turning back. He began to train with new intensity, not to conquer, but to prepare. His sword sang through the air like a promise. He learned the languages of diplomats, the movement of soldiers, the songs of wanderers. He gathered men who believed in him, young warriors weary of borders, who dreamed of a peace uniting both Iran and Tehran. To them, Sohrab spoke of unity, not dominance. "We fight not to divide," he told them, "but to mend what pride has broken." And they followed him, for his voice carried both the strength of his father and compassion of his mother. He became a leader not because he demanded it, but because his conviction gave others courage. Before he left, he stood once more with Tamine beneath the same moon that had watched his parents meet. "I will return," he promised, "with my father's blessing and peace between nations." Her hands trembled as she touched his face. "My son," she said, "be careful what peace you chase. Some destinies are written not in ink, but in sorrow." He smiled. "Then I will write a new one." When he rode out from Samangan, the people lined the streets, blessing him with flowers and prayers. The wind carried the scent of saffron and dust. Tamine stood upon the balcony, her veil lifting slightly in the breeze, and though her lips did not move, her heart whispered a prayer. "May he find what I could not say." Sohrab looked once over his shoulder, toward the distant palace that had been his home. Then he turned his gaze to the mountains, where the road to Iran began, and spurred his horse forward. The dawn spread like fire across the horizon, and the boy who had dreamed of a father became a man riding toward his fate. In every heart lies a map drawn not in ink, but in longing. What would you do if your destiny was someone's secret? The dawn that saw Sohrab's army depart was pale and windless, as though the world itself were holding its breath. From the walls of Samangan, a faint shimmer of steel stretched toward the horizon, an endless procession of men and horses, banners rippling softly in the morning light. The air was filled with a hum of movement, the low murmur of prayer, the rhythmic clatter of hooves on stone. Sohrab rode at the front, the onyx band glinting faintly on his arm. Around him, his generals whispered strategies, but his gaze stayed on the horizon, where the mountains of Iran waited like sleeping giants. The men behind him believed they rode toward conquest. Only he knew he rode toward truth. Yet even he could not imagine how costly that truth would be. Behind them, the city began to fade. Mothers stood at doorways with hands pressed to their lips. Children waved until their arms ached, not yet old enough to understand the way to goodbye. The smell of burning incense clung to the air, a prayer for safe return, a plea to the gods of wind and war. In every home, someone whispered his name, as though courage itself depended on it. As the army wound through valleys, the sun rose higher, turning the helmets of soldiers into small fires. The sound of marching grew steady, a living drumbeat echoing through the canyons. Birds startled from their nests, wheeling above them in clouds of silver wings. And through it all, Sohrab rode silently, his mind far from the noise of men. He remembered his mother's final words, soft as breath, "Be careful what peace you chase." He wondered what she meant. How could peace be dangerous? He had dreamed of nothing else. That night, they camped near a river that marked the border of Tehran. The men built fires and sang songs of home, their laughter mingling with the sound of water against the stones. Sohrab stood apart, staring at the reflection of stars in the current. He traced the edge of the onyx band, his thoughts heavy. "Father," he murmured, though the night gave no reply. "Where are you tonight? Do you dream of me as I dream of you?" He slept little, and when he did, his dreams were strange. He saw a man with silver hair and eyes like mirrors, standing on a field of dust. The man called his name, but when Sohrab ran toward him, the earth opened between them, and he woke before they could touch. Far to the west, beyond the Oxus River, another man stirred from sleep beneath the same stars. Rostam, now older, still mighty but tempered by time, rose from his bed and reached for his sword. He had felt it too, that restless whisper in the dark, the uneasy stirring of fate. For weeks, rumors had reached him of a young warrior leading Tehran's forces with unmatched valor. Some said he was scarcely 20, yet fought with the strength of 10 men. Others said his eyes were kind even in battle. Rostam had dismissed the stories as legend until the dreams began. He dreamed of a boy calling to him across a field of sand. He dreamed of a lion cub walking beside a grown lion, their shadows merging. He dreamed of fire that refused to die. That morning, He saddled Raksh and rode out with the Persian banners. His armor gleamed, his movement still as sure as ever, but something within him felt altered. His heart, though he did not know why, was heavier than the shield he carried. The two armies moved like rivers flowing from opposite directions, each unaware they would soon meet in the same basin of blood. The distance between them closed with every sunrise. For Sohrab, the journey was one of wonder and unease. Each village they passed greeted him with both fear and admiration. Mothers hid their sons, yet offered him water. Old men blessed him, whispering that he might be the one to end the endless cycle of war. He smiled politely, but in his heart, he wondered, could one man truly change what generations had broken? He led with mercy, forbidding the burning of towns or harm to the innocent. His men followed without question. They saw not a conqueror, but a promise. The promise of a new kind of leader, one who fought not for greed, but for honor. When the army reached the plains beyond the Oxus, the world seemed to widen. The sky stretched vast and pale, and the wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers. It was here that the scouts brought word. An Iranian champion had been sent to meet them, a single man said to be unstoppable. The soldiers muttered his name with awe and fear. Rostam. At first, Sohrab laughed. The same Rostam from the stories, he asked. He must be older than the hills themselves. But when the messenger nodded gravely, the laughter faded. Something cold passed through him. Recognition without reason. That night, sleep would not come. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, feeling as though the world itself was tightening around him. If he truly is Rostam, he said aloud, then I will meet him not as enemy, but as equal. Perhaps he will listen. Perhaps he will see. He could not know that the same thought drifted through Rostam's mind miles away. The old warrior sat by his own campfire, polishing his blade by starlight. Around him, men spoke of victory, but his gaze was fixed on the horizon. Who is this youth, he muttered. So bold, so brave, and yet my heart trembles when I think of him. Raksh snorted softly, as though in answer. Rostam smiled faintly and stroked the horse's neck. We've faced demons and kings, he said. But something about this battle feels different, almost familiar. The wind rose that night, sweeping across both camps like an unseen messenger. It carried the smell of smoke and myrrh, of sweat and steel, of memories unspoken. In Samangan, far away, Tamine woke from sleep and clutched her chest, her heart pounding. She went to the balcony and looked toward the west, though there was nothing to see but the endless dark. Please, she whispered, not this way. By dawn, both armies were in motion again. The sun rose over the Oxus, spilling light across the water like molten gold. The horses' hooves thundered against the earth. Banners rippled in the wind. Each army was certain the gods' favorites' cause, yet above them, the sky remained impartial, endlessly blue, endlessly vast. The closer they drew, the quieter Sohrab became. His men mistook for focus, but it was something deeper, a growing sense that his steps were not entirely his own. It was as if he walked within a story already written, one whose ending he could almost taste but not yet name. On the third morning, as they approached the Iranian frontier, he dismounted and knelt, pressing his palm to the ground. This soil feels like home, he murmured. His general looked at him, puzzled. You've never been here, my lord. No, Sohrab said softly, but my blood remembers. The army advanced. Far ahead, dust rose on the horizon, the mark of approaching riders. The two rivers had at last found the same valley. The drumbeat of hooves grew louder, faster, steadier, until it seemed the earth itself was keeping time. The first banners appeared in the distance, bright against the pale sky. Sohrab's men tensed, their armor glinting like scales of light. He raised his hand, and silence fell. The wind brushed against his face, warm and whispering. 2 stars, he thought, moving beneath the same heaven. He did not yet know that they would soon collide, shattering both sky and story. 2 stars began their journey across the same sky, too bright to know they would collide. If fate gave you a warning, would you listen or call it just a wind? The day of the battle rose pale and trembling, as though the sun itself feared what it would witness. A thin mist clung to the plains by the Oxus River, muffling the sound of banners unfurling, the whinnies of restless horses, the sharp clink of armor being fastened by shaking hands. Men stood silent in their ranks, hearts thudding beneath layers of steel and pride. It was a stillness that felt alive, heavy with the scent of iron and dust and something unnamed, the weight of destiny, perhaps waiting to draw its first breath. Rostam sat astride rocks at the edge of the Iranian lines, his face shadowed beneath his helmet. He had fought countless battles, faced demons, monsters, kings. But this morning, the unease in him was unlike anything he had known. The night before, he had dreamed again, the same dream of a boy calling his name through a storm, the same sense of sorrow that followed him into waking. He had tried to shake it off, to let duty drown out, but dreams, like debts, always return. Across the plain, Sohrab stood tall before his army, the wind tugging at his cloak. His eyes were calm but searching, as though he were looking for something beyond the field, a sign, a voice, an answer. His soldiers murmured that he looked like a god descended from legend, too radiant for mortal war. But inside him was only quiet fire, steady and consuming. He had heard tales that the Iranian champion was unmatched in strength, a man whose name had echoed across centuries, Rostam. The thought thrilled him. To test his courage against such a hero was not dread but honor, and in some unspoken corner of his soul, he hoped the man might remind him of something familiar, though he could not name what that was. When the horn sounded, the world seemed to exhale. Both sides surged forward, but in the center, two figures rode out to meet between the armies, one old, one young, each carrying the unknowable passed upon their shoulders. "Name yourself," Rostam called, his voice deep as thunder. Sohrab, the youth, answered, steady and proud, son of Tamene of Samangan, leader of the Turanian host. The sound struck Rostam like a bell half recognized. Tamene, the name flickered through him, a memory of moonlight, a woman's eyes, a promise made long ago. But before thought could become belief, doubt smothered it. What were the chances? The boy was young, too young. The mind plays tricks when the heart is weary. "And you," Sohrab called, "must be Rostam, if stories speak true." "I am," said Rostam, "and it seems you have come to test me." "No," said the boy softly, though pride sharpened his words. "I have come to meet you. But if the gods demand a trial, then let it be fair." Their horses circled slowly, each step a beat in the great heart of fate. The air trembled between them. The armies fell silent, their noise dissolving into the soft hiss of wind across sand. Then, as if drawn by invisible threads, they moved, two storms colliding in the valley of history. The first clash of their blades rang out like the cry of the earth itself. Sparks scattered into the morning light. Steel met steel, muscle met will, and time seemed to stop. They fought not with rage but with rhythm, a fierce dance of precision and power. The watchers could hardly tell who was stronger. Rostam's blows were heavy, forged from experience. Sohrab's were swift, lit by youth and conviction. Every movement mirrored the other, as if one body fought against its own reflection. Between their strikes, their eyes met. There was something in that gaze, an ache, a question neither could name. Sohrab felt it first. A strange tenderness beneath the fury, an echo of love in the enemy's eyes. But he shook it off. Battle leaves no room for wondering. Rostam, too, felt his heart falter. Who is this boy, he thought. Why does my spirit tremble each time he speaks? His breath grew ragged, his arms weary, not from the fight, but from the weight of recognition pressing at the edges of his soul. The duel lasted through the day, under a sky that grew hotter and redder with each passing hour. Dust rose like smoke, wrapping them in a haze of gold. At last, Sohrab struck hard, knocking Rostam from his horse. A cry went up from the Turanian ranks. But the young warrior hesitated, lowering his sword instead of ending it. "Yield," he said gently. "You are great. I would rather know you than kill you." Rostam stared up at him, stunned by the mercy in his enemy's voice. Yet pride, that old companion, flared within him. "Do you think me so weak, boy?" he growled, forcing himself to his feet. "If you would prove yourself, finish the fight." Sohrab's face tightened with sorrow. "I seek no man's death. I seek only the truth. But Rostam's fury was his armor. He lunged again, his strength renewed by shame and fear. Their blades met once more, their breath mingling, their hearts pounding in unison. The dust thickened, the light dimmed. And then, a single strike, swift as the turning of fate. Sohrab stumbled. For a heartbeat, he stood still, eyes wide with disbelief. Then the sword fell from his hand, and he sank to ground as though the earth itself were pulling him close. Silence spread like water. Even the wind stopped to listen. Rostam stood over him, his chest heaving, his blade slick with victory that felt like ruin. The boy smiled faintly. "You have fought well, old lion," he said. "You have won." Something in the tone, that gentle acceptance, broke through the fog of triumph. Rostam knelt beside him. "You fight like no other," he said. "Tell me your father's name, so I may honor him." Sohrab's eyes softened, the color of dusk. "My father," he whispered, "his name is Rostam. He left my mother before I could speak, but she told me he would know me by this." He lifted his arm weakly, revealing the onyx band gleaming faintly through the blood and dust. The world seemed to fall away. Rostam stared, frozen. The name on the band caught the sunlight like fire, burning through denial. His sword slipped from his hand. "No!" he breathed, his voice hollow. "No, not this." Sohrab smiled sadly. "Then it's true," he murmured. "You are he?" Rostam reached for him, cradling his head in trembling hands. "My son," he whispered. "My son." The words broke apart like fragile glass. Why did I not see it? Why did I not know? Sohrab's breath came shallow. "Because fate blinds us," he said softly. "Even heroes cannot outrun their stories." Rostam pressed his forehead to the boy's. "I will save you. The healers, I will call them." Sohrab shook his head. "No healer can mend what destiny has written. Do not mourn me, father. I have found you." Tears blurred the old warrior's vision. He had wept for comrades, for kings, for the fallen 100 fields. But never like this. This was not grief. It was the unmaking of a life. The soldiers on both sides watched in stunned silence. The battle had stopped. Swords hung limp in weary hands. Men who had come to kill now knelt without knowing why. For in that moment, something greater than war filled the air, the sound of love breaking under the weight of fate. Rostam held his son as the light began to fade. "You should have lived long enough to surpass me," he whispered. Sohrab smiled faintly. "Then I have," he said, and the breath left him like a sigh carried by the wind. The sun slipped behind the mountains, turning the sky to ash and gold. Rostam laid his son upon the earth and tore at his armor until his hands bled. His cry rose over the plain, not a warrior's roar, but father's lament, raw and endless. It rolled across the valley, through the camps, up into the waiting mountains. They say the rocks themselves cracked that day, unable to bear the sound. Even the river seemed to mourn, its current slowing as if in reverence. Soldiers from both sides lowered their heads. The poets would later write that for a single day, Iran and Turan forgot they were enemies. Grief made them kin. When the stars emerged, Rostam sat beside his son's body, silent and unblinking. He traced a line of Sohrab's jaw, the same curve as his own, and whispered stories the boy would never hear. Tales of his childhood, of rocks, of the mountains and their endless skies. He spoke until the words blurred into tears. The next morning, when the armies withdrew, they left behind not victory or defeat, but a wound carved into history. It would never heal. Every father who sent a son to war would remember. Every son who grew beneath the shadow of silence would dream of a voice calling from across the sands. Even mountains wept that day, or so the poets say. Pause here, listener. Breathe. What would you say if you had only one last chance to be understood? When the battle was over, the world seemed to forget how to move. The dust that had risen from the clash of thousands now floated gently down, settling like ash over the still forms left behind. The wind, once wild with war cries, softened into a weary sigh. Even the river ran quieter, as if unwilling to disturb the silence that hung over the plain. Rostam sat beside his son's body until the stars reappeared. Night came slowly, one hesitant shadow at a time, wrapping the battlefield in muted silver. The torches had burned low, the soldiers had long withdrawn, yet he remained, unmoving. Rock stood nearby, head bowed, nostrils flaring with the smell of blood and grief. In the distance, the faint songs of the wounded drifted through the dark. Not songs of victory, but of mourning. For the first time in his life, Rostam had no battle left to fight. His sword laid aside, useless now, its blade dull beneath the moon. His armor felt too heavy to bear, every joint aching beneath the weight of what he could not undo. He looked at Sohrab's face, pale and still, and saw in it every moment he had lost. The laughter he would never hear, the questions he would never answer. The years had been stolen by silence. He thought of Tamine, waiting somewhere beyond the mountains, her eyes turned to a road that would never bring her son home. How could he ever face her? How could he explain that love, once denied, had circled back to punish them both? In Persia, it was said that destiny could not be bargained with. The priest taught that every soul carried within it a thread woven by the gods, sometimes shining, sometimes dark, but always leading toward the appointed end. Rostam had always believed this, had fought his wars with faith in the order of things. But that night, staring at the boy who bore his face, he found no comfort in the doctrine of fate. If destiny was just, why had it asked for this? He whispered Sohrab's name once, quietly, as though it might wake him. The sound vanished into the still air. Somewhere beyond hearing, an owl cried, a low, mournful call. The stars burned cold above him, indifferent to the pain of men. When dawn came, the light felt foreign, too bright for morning. Rostam covered his son's body with his own cloak and lifted him onto Raksh's back. The horse stood firm, its great muscles trembling beneath the weight. Together, they carried Sohrab to a hill overlooking the river. There, beneath a grove of cypress trees, Rostam dug the earth with his hands until they bled. The soil was soft and dark, and as he worked, he found himself whispering prayers he hadn't spoken since boyhood. He placed the onyx band upon his son's chest, the same token that had once united two lovers and now bound father and son in eternal silence. "May the earth be gentle with you," he murmured. "May the wind carry your name kindly." When he finished, he sat back and watched the morning light fall across the grave. For a long time, he said nothing. Words felt too small for what filled him: grief, guilt, awe, love. All of them blending into one quiet truth, that no man, no matter how strong, could escape the tenderness of loss. In the days that followed, he did not return to the courts or the feasts. He rode far into the wilderness, living among shepherds and wanderers. Those who met him said his hair had turned white overnight. They said he spoke little, but when he did, his voice was soft, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. He no longer boasted of battles or the kings he had served. Instead, he spoke of forgiveness, of the strange peace that comes when sorrow is no longer resisted. And in the villages that dotted the plains, the story began to change. It was no longer told as a tale of two warriors or the clash of nations. It became something quieter, more human, a story of a father who did not know his son until too late, and of a son who forgave even as he fell. Mothers whispered to their children before sleep, as a warning against pride, as a reminder that silence can wound deeper than any sword. Poets wove it into their verses, filling it with stars and tears so that no one would forget. They said that on certain nights, when the wind rose from the Oxus, you could still hear the echo of Rostam's cry. Faint, distant, almost a song, not of anger, but of remembrance. And the river, carrying that sound, flowed on toward the sea, bearing it from village to village, from heart to heart. In time, Rostam returned to the world, but he was not the man he had been. His strength remained, yet his heart had softened. When people bowed before him, he would raise them gently. "Do not kneel," he would say. "Save your reverence for the living, for the one still within reach." He built a small shrine on the hill where Sohrab slept, and each year he came to sit there when the apricots bloomed, laying a handful of wheat on the grave. He never spoke of the boy by name, but those who saw him said the silence around him was its own kind of prayer. And so, the legend of Rostam and Sohrab became more than a tragedy. It became a mirror, showing every listener something of their own heart. Fathers saw into cost of pride. Sun saw the longing to be seen. Lovers heard it the warning of distance, and poets found in it the shape of forgiveness. The tale endured because it was not only about death, but about the love that lingers after it, the love that even fate cannot erase. When stories end, silence becomes the storyteller. The sun sank low again, spilling gold over the fields where so much blood had dried. The cypress trees swayed softly, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. In the distance, a woman's voice carried, a lullaby for no one in particular, for all who had ever lost and still hoped. Night gathered once more, folding the land into shadow. The stars returned, the same ancient witnesses, steady and bright. Somewhere, in that vast quiet, the echo of a father's grief melted into something gentler, a prayer, perhaps, or forgiveness finally set free. Do you think forgiveness can travel beyond death? There's a saying among Persian poets that when a story survives longer than the stones of its cities, it is no longer just a tale, but a truth wearing many faces. And so it is with the story of Rostam and Sohrab. Centuries have passed since that fateful day by the Oxus. Empires have risen, languages have changed, the wind has carried new names across the same plains. Yet, in the quiet corners of tea houses and classrooms, and in whispered bedtime retellings, their names still breathe. The story endures not because of its sorrow, but because it tells us something timeless about what it means to be human, to love, to misunderstand, to lose, and to seek forgiveness. In the Persian soul, fate is not a chain but a thread, invisible, soft, yet unbreakable. It binds every soul to its appointed path, but it also weaves all lives together. Rostam's tragedy is not that he was fated to kill his son. It is that, blinded by pride and silence, he never saw the thread connecting them until it snapped. The Persians call this bucket, destiny shaped by both divine will and human choice. The gods write the pattern, but our hands hold the needle. When listeners hear this tale today, they often ask, why did fate not warn him? But perhaps it did. In dreams, in the trembling of his heart, in the tenderness he felt when he saw the boy's face, warnings were there, like faint music beneath the noise of duty. But who among us truly listens when pride speaks louder than love? This myth reminds us that strength alone cannot save us from sorrow. Rostam, the mightiest of heroes, could defeat demons and kings, yet he could not defeat his own blindness. And Sohrab, brave and brilliant, inherited not only his father's courage, but also his silence. Between them stood generations of unspoken words, the same silence that echoes in every household where love is felt but not said aloud. If you close your eyes, you can almost imagine it, a father and son, divided not by distance but by misunderstanding. You may not wield a sword or wear armor, yet perhaps you have felt that same distance in your own life. A conversation left unfinished, a heart guarded for too long, an apology that arrives too late. The myth is not ancient at all. It happens still, in kitchens and living rooms, in the pauses between text messages, in the quiet pride that keeps us from saying I miss you. In the old Persian way, stories were meant to teach without preaching. They wrapped wisdom in beauty, so that even sorrow would feel gentle. And so, through Rostam and Sohrab, we learn that love's greatest enemy is not hate. It is silence, the kind that grows like frost between people who should be warm to one another. Yet the story is not only about grief. There is grace in it too, the grace of realization. When Rostam cradles his dying son, he sees for the first time what it means to be human beyond the armor, to love, to fail, and to be forgiven. In that single moment, centuries of pride fall away. That is why Persians still speak of him not as a monster of fate, but as a man who found truth too late and carried it with dignity. Through him, we glimpse a Persian vision of redemption, not grand or divine, but quiet. Repentance in Persian thought is not about punishment. It is about awakening. Rostam's awakening, though born in sorrow, becomes his greatest victory. For in the end, he learns the hardest art of all, humility. And Sohrab, the boy who dreamed of peace, becomes more than a fallen hero. He becomes a bridge. His death softens hearts, halts wars, turns soldiers into mourners. He is a reminder that blood need not always call for blood, that even in an age of empires, mercy is the truest mark of strength. Over time, the myth grew into a mirror for Persia itself, a nation proud, wounded, yet endlessly capable of rebirth. Poets like Ferdowsi did not write merely to preserve history. They wrote to heal it. Each verse of Shahnameh is a pulse of cultural memory, reminding Persians who they were and what they must not forget. Honor, in that world, was not the absence of error but the courage to face it. Reconciliation was not a weakness, but a sacred act. To forgive was to join the rhythm of the cosmos, the eternal dance between light and shadow. Even today, when Iranians tell this story, it does not end with death. It ends with remembrance. Rostam's cry still lives in their poetry, not as despair but as promise, that every generation might learn to speak before silence takes its place. And perhaps that is why the myth feels so familiar to anyone who hears it, because beneath the armor, beyond the names and ages, we all live some version of it. The parent trying to understand the child who has outgrown them, the friend too proud to apologize, the lover waiting for a message that never comes. In every age, hearts break in the same rhythm. The Persian poets say, when words fail, time speaks. And so this story is spoken across centuries, not to condemn, but to comfort. It tells us that even in our mistakes, we are not alone, that every silence can still become a song if we learn to listen differently. So if you find yourself thinking of Rostam tonight, do not think only of the warrior or the grief. Think of the man who knelt in the dust and learned too late that love is not weakness. Think of the boy who smiled with forgiveness in his final breath. Think of how the story traveled so far, only to find you, listening in the quiet, perhaps with your own silence waiting to be broken. And so, the myth becomes a mirror held up to us. If this story touched your heart, share it. Perhaps someone you love needs to hear it tonight. The night returns, soft and unhurried, wrapping the earth once more in its quiet silver shawl. Above the deserts of Persia, the stars breathe like old embers, steady, glowing, endless. The wind moves through the cypress trees, through the ruins and forgotten courtyards, carry with it the faint scent of jasmine and memory. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The echo of a story just told, the lingering heartbeat of 1,000 years. Thank you for walking beside me through this long road of shadows and starlight. You have listened to a tale born of courage and sorrow, shaped by hands long turned to dust, but still warm in the fire of remembrance. The world changes, yet the stories remain, flickering between silence and song, reminding us that the human heart has always been the same, fragile, hopeful, hungry for meaning. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Rostam's name still rides a wind. The poets say his soul never left the plain by the Oxus, that when night falls, he mounts rocks once more and rides beneath the moon, keeping watch over the sleeping land. They say Sohrab's spirit walks beside him, no longer as son or rival, but as light beside shadow. Two souls reconciled at last, tracing their old paths beneath the same eternal stars. Perhaps that is what all stories truly are, not endings, but quiet reconciliations. A way for grief to breathe again. A way for the living to touch the hands of those who came before. The ruins of Persia still whisper if you listen closely. The stones hum with old verses, fragments of the Shahnameh carried by the wind. In the villages, children still fall asleep to the names of heroes they have never seen. And in their dreams, the same moonlight pours over them that once touched Rostam's armor, the same wind that once tangled Sohrab's hair. Time bends for stories like this. It remembers what we cannot. You see, heroes do not keep the world awake with battles or crowns. They keep it awake with meaning. When their voices fade, the world grows dim. When we tell their tales again, the flame returns. And so, each listener becomes a guardian of the fire, you among them now. You have carried their names through the night, keeping them alive a little longer, as countless others did before you. There's a Persian proverb that says, "He who tells a story relights a candle in a dark room." Tonight, we have lit many. Perhaps their glow will linger with you, not as sorrow, but as peace, the kind that reminds you that even in heartbreak, beauty waits quietly, and that every loss leaves behind a light of its own. If you step outside now and look up, you might find the same stars that watched over them, the same ancient fires scattered across the sky. Imagine them not as distant or cold, but as witnesses, silent keepers of all that has ever been loved or lost. They shine for those who still remember, for those who still dare to tell the stories. Let the wind guide your thoughts now, slow and soft. Let the noise of the day fade into something simpler. Breath, heartbeat, stillness. The tale is done, but its warmth remains, a quiet ember beneath the ribs. Tomorrow, the world will return with its noise and hunger, its demands and duties. But tonight, you rest in the company of old souls. You have seen pride and forgiveness, loss and love, and the way even sorrow can teach tenderness. You have walked the paths of Persia's past and found your own reflection there, a reminder that every human heart, across ages and oceans, longs for the same thing: to be known, to be understood, to be remembered kindly. So close your eyes. The sands have settled. The horses sleep. The torches dim. Let the night gather you gently, as it gathered them. Somewhere far away, the storyteller's voice fades into the hush of the wind, leaving only a whisper. The fire still burns. If you found calm in this journey through time, subscribe, rest your heart, and meet me again where the next story begins.